Imagine TikTok being so powerful that they actually help you identify the person that almost murdered you. On my For You page the other day, I found this viral video that you guys might recognize, which states videos I took before almost being hunted and murdered. I clicked on her page, listened to her story, and was like, I have to know more. So I reached out and got the full thing. This is the case of Flowers Don't Growl. April 29th through April 30th of 2019, Taylor and her boyfriend Chris decided to take a trip to Falls Creek Falls, Tennessee. Taylor was 5 months pregnant at the time, so they figured they needed one last little trip before they were going to have a baby. And Taylor swore that Chris was going to propose. So that's why she documented so much of this trip, not even realizing that later on it was going to be used as evidence. So they set up at their assigned camping lot. They spent their time hiking, exploring, having fun. Taylor would collect flowers along the way to document it for memory's sake, but please keep these flowers in mind. And then on the second day, everyone from their assigned area was gone except for them. So they were more alone than before, or so they thought. Welcome back to part 2 of Flowers Don't Growl. So later in the night on their last day, they ended up hearing a loud crash. There's very windy roads nearby, so they figured that it was a wreck. And just to make sure kids weren't involved and that everyone was safe, they got out of their tent and ran over to the crash site, which was maybe half a mile away to go check on the people. The sheriff ends up showing up and it's like a DUI situation, but everyone ultimately was okay. So before heading back to their campsite, Taylor says she has to go use the restroom. So her and Chris walk over to the bathroom so she can do her thing, and in the distance they see a light flickering. And as it gets closer, they notice that someone is running with a flashlight. So they're both cracking jokes to each other like, oh my gosh, this guy really has to go to the bathroom. But once he approaches the restroom, he ends up stopping right at them instead of actually going into the bathroom. And states, and I quote, "Wow, you guys are fast." Creepy. Taylor notices that he has a weird smile on his face and feels really nauseous but just associates it with the pregnancy. So just to be nice, they continue to have a conversation with him, but ultimately this is where things go wrong. Part 3 on Flowers Don't Growl. So Chris and Taylor continue their weird interaction with this man. Chris explaining that they got to the wreck fast because they wanted to make sure everyone was okay. And the guy goes, yeah, I guess I'm just used to it. And Taylor's confused because like, used to what? Hikes? Car wrecks? They ask what he does, and he says he travels a lot and likes to go camping. And Taylor, starting to get very uncomfortable now, tells Chris that, hey, they need to go back to the campsite because the police will be over there waiting for their statements. Just trying to make an excuse to leave, and Chris could tell it was BS. And as they start to take steps back, he starts to take steps towards them, asking questions like, hey, how long are you guys going to be here for? And his hand kept playing with his hoodie pocket. Chris was starting to pick up on the message as they continued to walk backwards, while the man followed them forward. And then this guy decides to tell them a little story. He was like, car accident. It got me thinking this morning as I was hiking and I passed these flowers. I stopped because they were so beautiful and I heard a deep growl and it scared me. And it makes me think, you never know what day is going to be your last. That's when they saw the knife. Part 4 to Flowers Don't Growl. So this is when Taylor noticed the outline in his hoodie pocket was the shape of a knife. It completely clicked for her and she told her husband that they needed to run. He looked at her like, what's going on? And she just states, flowers don't growl. So they took off running, and this is when he took off chasing them. And I'll show a map of where exactly they were chased. This is where Taylor and Chris ended up, and this is where they last saw the guy chasing them. And they made it all the way back to the crash site, and luckily the police were still there. They told them what happened and made a report, and 2 of the cops went out looking for him but couldn't find him anywhere, while the other officer accompanied them back to the campsite so that they could pack up their stuff and leave. They tried to get updated on their case later on, but never ever got an update. Having the baby and it being a couple years later, Taylor sits down and ends up making a TikTok. It goes viral and a bunch of people start to DM her with potential suspects. Taylor stopped looking at her DMs because it got so emotional, but one user that messaged her lived in the Falls Creek Falls area and had followed a particular case. She opened the DM and saw the man. This is James L. Jordan. Welcome to Flowers Don't Growl Part 5. So Taylor immediately recognized James L. Jordan as being the person that tried to attack her and her now husband that night. And horrifyingly enough, he ended up killing 2 weeks later, stabbing one female victim that did survive, but stabbing the male to death. The male victim ended up sending out an SOS last minute before he passed, and the police came to arrest Jordan. And honestly, one of the worst things was that he was not found guilty by reason of insanity. And Taylor has tried to reach out to police multiple times because he was very calm and collected the night that her and her husband survived. She has scoured all of her photos trying to figure out where he was at and found out that he was staying back here outside of the regular lots. Followers have pointed out things like this creepy shadow in this video, but ultimately we don't really know where he was at. But because of the story that he told about the flowers, she thinks that he had been stalking them for a while, watching her pick them. Taylor now is using her page to promote safety, learning how to protect yourself and carrying items such as mace or a taser, and campsites where you pay to camp probably should have security. Taylor is tagged below, so please go follow her to keep up with her story.
Today, we will be looking into the case of Elizabeth Fritzl and her monster father, Joseph Fritzl. This case emerged in 2008 when Elizabeth Fritzl told police she had been in prison for 24 years by her father. Joseph Fritzl lured his 18-year-old daughter at the time, Elizabeth, into a dungeon he had built downstairs in his house. After her disappearance, Joseph framed it as if she ran away and joined a cult. He did this through forcing her to write letters. For over 24 years, she was physically, sexually, emotionally, and psychologically assaulted, along with being malnourished and beaten. She had multiple kids over the years, and one of them died from malnutrition. Due to serious medical conditions she was experiencing, he let her go to the hospital, where someone tipped the staff of what was going on. After DNA evidence confirmed the kids were actually Joseph's, he was in prison for 15 years without the possibility of parole. This was such a sick case, and in my opinion, 15 years wasn't enough. Follow for more cases like these.
If you guys want to talk about the worst mom in the history of moms, let's talk about the case of Diane Downs, who literally attempted to murder all 3 of her children in order to get a man to fall in love with her. So what exactly creates a monster like this? Well, Diane was born August 7th of 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. Most of her life, she was pretty well behaved, but she started to rebel against her parents around high school. She cut her hair, had a really edgy phase, and got super boy crazy. And she started to date guys, which was way outside of her strict family's rules. And she fell in love with a boy named Steve Downs. They were high school sweethearts, but the second that college hit, they ended up going separate ways. He joined the Navy, and she went to Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College. And while they said that they would stay faithful to each other, she immediately started to hook up with other guys when she got there, and was expelled for her promiscuous behavior, and had to go back and live with her strict parents. While Steve came back, he forgave her, and they ended up running away together and getting married on November 13th of 1973. They were known to fight constantly. But in 1974, they had their first child together, making everything worse. Part 2 to the Diane Downs case. Well, the marriage between her and Steve was beyond rocky, and having their first daughter together, Christy, did not help that improve. And 6 months after she was born, Diane ended up leaving Christy with her dad so she could join the Navy, which only lasted 3 weeks because she had to leave for severe blisters. They had another kid in 1976 named Cheryl, and Steve had a vasectomy immediately after this, but then Diane was pregnant again. So I guess you can imagine how that happened. She did not go through with the pregnancy, but her and Steve stayed together. Later, they moved to Mesa, Arizona, got new jobs, and Diane was having affairs with all of her new co-workers. Got pregnant again, kept this one, and had a boy named Danny. Steve actually still decided to stay for the sake of the kids, and wanted to remain a father figure to Danny. But eventually, they ended up getting divorced in 1980. And this is when things got significantly more unstable. Diane started to bounce from relationship to relationship, moving in and out with different men, and then decided to become a surrogate in order to make money, even though she didn't pass all the psychiatric exams. Terrifying. But everything changed when she met a man named Nick. Part 3 to the Diane Downs case. So this is when Diane met Robert Knickenbocker, who went by the name Nick. And she swore that this man was the love of her life. He had separated from his wife and describes the relationship as being intense and overwhelming. He eventually broke it off with her though because he didn't like kids. And this is when Diane became devastated and angry at her own children for getting in the way of her love. Her kids and her moved to Cottage Grove, Oregon, but still couldn't seem to forget Nick. She would obsessively write to him, and she really stopped paying attention to her kids' health. They often went hungry, went without coats in the cold. It was even said by a neighbor that Cheryl had mentioned that she was scared of her mom. Well, on Thursday, May 19th of 1983, everything went down. This story is from her perspective, by the way. They were coming home from a friend's house whenever Diane decided to take the kids on a scenic route. They did this often to explore. Hungry Like the Wolf started to play on the radio, and this is when she noticed a bushy-haired stranger signaling her over from the middle of the road. And at 10 p.m., with her kids asleep in the back of the car, she got out to talk to him, and he immediately demanded for her keys. Part 4 to the Diane Downs case. So immediately after this stranger demanded for her keys, they had some sort of a struggle, in which he shoots all 3 of her kids and then shoots her in the left arm. In order to distract him, she pretends to throw her keys in the bush, and then uses the keys that are actually in her hand to turn on the car and then drive wildly like a lunatic to the hospital. So she pulls up to this hospital with her kids in bad condition, and all of the medical professionals that were there that night were shocked by her reactions. Her daughter Cheryl ended up passing away, and Danny and Christy were literally clinging to life. And she showed no emotion at all. Not only had she wrapped her own gun wound and not her kids', but she was worried about her new car having blood on it. She seemed relieved that Cheryl was dead, and was shocked when she found out that Danny, her 3-year-old child, had been paralyzed. And she was only shocked because he wasn't hit in the heart. Christy had had a stroke, but she was still alive, so currently Diane was the only witness. And a lot of moms actually felt for her during this time, and were even scared to leave with this man on the loose. But the public opinion didn't last for long. Part 5 to the Diane Downs case. even though the police were already suspicious of Diane, because she was the only witness, they had to rule out her story. So they got a composite sketch of the guy and they ended up searching the whole area, where they only found some bullet casings. And her interviews during this time, if you guys have ever seen them, are so weird, definitely worth watching. This woman was eating up the attention so much, and she made this story into this whole overcoming thing where like she battled the patriarchy, ended up actually getting away from this man, like she's kind of the hero in the situation, but didn't show any emotion towards her kids. She went on the Oprah show and would crack jokes and have the crowd laughing. So the police ended up asking her to do a reenactment of this event. And it's truly one of the weirdest videos that you will ever see because she seems like she's having fun. Any mom being put through this would have found this to be extremely traumatic to relive this event. Instead, she's having fun, smirking, checking herself out in the car mirror, ends up hitting her arm on the steering wheel and says that almost hurt as bad as when, and cuts herself off. And it seems like she was about to say as when I shot myself. Part 6 to the Diane Downs case. So after seeing this horrific reenactment, people just flat out are not believing her anymore, especially whenever she said this whole thing took place in like 5 to 10 seconds. And she did not take the criticism very well, literally stating, if I had shot my own children, wouldn't I have done a good job of it? She's literally gaslighting people who are letting her know that things aren't adding up. Back at the hospital, Christy is starting to improve a lot, but she's still nonverbal. Her mom ends up coming to visit her actually, and her heart spikes. So the police are starting to want to have her as a witness, and they immediately get her in with a therapist. They practice by her writing down the shooter on a piece of paper and her throwing it into a fire, until eventually she feels safe enough to give it to the therapist. And once she did, it said her mom. The police went to go check Diane's house, found bullet casings that matched those at the crime scene, and also found a diary with intros about Robert, and talking about how Robert doesn't want kids. So then the police had their motive. Which Oprah even brought up to her that the man was now afraid of her because he thought she had shot her own kids. She tried to change her story a few more times, but she ended up getting arrested. Part 7 to the Diane Downs case. So by the time it was time for her trial, she was pregnant again. She said she did it because she missed her kids and was lonely. But honestly, I feel like she did it just because she thought her sentence wouldn't be as bad. They ended up playing the song Hungry Like the Wolf in the courtroom, and Diane was jamming out to it. They showed the tapes and she showed no emotion. They even did a doll reenactment for the jury to paint a picture. And then Christy testified, saying that her mom had actually stopped the car when she thought they were all asleep, went to the trunk, came around, and ended up shooting them. Cheryl first, Danny second, and her last. Wrapped herself in a towel and proceeded to drive slowly to the hospital. So ultimately, Diane was found guilty. And to this day, she is still in complete denial, thinking that she is still innocent. She ended up having the baby girl in jail and she was immediately taken from her. This daughter was adopted, and Danny and Christy were actually adopted by one of the prosecutors on the case. Overall, it was a pretty happy ending. But Diane actually successfully broke out of jail for a little bit. If you want to hear that story, come over to my Instagram. It'll be on my middle reels tab.
Let's talk about the man who was murdered, decapitated, and dissected. 22-year-old Tim McLean. So Tim was working at a carnival and he was having a great time doing his thing, but he decided that it was time for him to grow up, get a real job, start a family, and become a man. And that's exactly what he did. He hopped on a Greyhound bus to go back to his hometown and be with his girlfriend to eventually kickstart the rest of his life. That's when 44-year-old Vince Lee hopped on the bus and he decided that he needed to sit next to Tim. By the way, this is Vince Lee. People on the bus said that he was acting a little bit strange, but they just chalked it off as him being weird. Initially, he sat in the front of the bus, but they came to a truck stop and he got off, smoked a cigarette, and when he got back on, he grabbed his bags and moved to the back of the bus where Tim was sitting. Witnesses say that Tim was the only person on the bus that actually acknowledged Vince. Tim gave Vince a little head nod and then he went back to sleep. A few hours go by and then out of nowhere, Vince pulls out a knife and starts going crazy on Tim. There was a man sitting across from them and he yelled to the bus driver, "Stop the bus, there's someone being stabbed." So automatically everyone on the bus starts going crazy, screaming, crying, throwing up, and trying to rush off the bus. The bus driver pulled the bus over and he ran to the back of the bus to see what was going on. Tim was screaming bloody murder. He was screaming so bad that witnesses say that they were haunted to this day by the screams from Tim being murdered. They realized that they couldn't help Tim and that he was basically dead, so they got off the bus to protect themselves. They called 911, but since they were in the middle of nowhere, the police took a long time to get there, like around 3 or 4 hours. After everyone got off the bus, Vince continued to stab Tim. And then he decided that that was enough, so he sliced his throat, decapitated him, and he hung his head up like this, and he basically showed everybody that was outside of the bus, he showed them like his head, as if it was a trophy. He then started to eat at Tim's body. He started with his eyes. He plucked both of them out and chewed them up and swallowed. Next was his nose. He took pieces of his nose and was chewing that up and eating. He even gutted Tim, and he ate pieces of his heart. When police finally arrived at the scene and was able to arrest Vince, and when they looked at the scene, it was blood everywhere. It was bits and pieces of Tim's body everywhere. Vince said he did this because God told him to. Tim's family was waiting for him in another part of Canada, and the strange thing about this is that Tim's mom seen it on the news, but she didn't know it was her son. So when she went to work at a nursing home, before they ate dinner, she decided to say a prayer for the victim's family, not even knowing that she was the victim's family. That's all I have for today, but I make videos every single day, so if you like true crime, don't forget to follow me and leave suggestions in the comments. Also, peep the fit. If you like my shirt, you can purchase one from Prince Kai. They're pretty cheap and they're very nice quality. So if you guys are interested in becoming part of the royalty family, I'm going to add him below.
Hi, I'm Cam, and this is the McDonald's Massacre Part 1. On July 18th, 1984, James gathered a small arsenal of weapons. His wife asked him where he was going. He replied, "I'm going to hunt humans." He had been at the same McDonald's earlier that day with his wife and children. This time, James was returning alone with a semi-automatic rifle, a semi-automatic pistol, and a 12-gauge pump shotgun. He told his family, "Goodbye, I won't be back." 45 people were inside the McDonald's restaurant in San Ysidro, California. James entered the building and first shot a 22-year-old woman named Kane below her left eye. She died minutes later. He then shot a 16-year-old employee, John Arnold, in the chest and arm. James yelled, quote, "Everybody get on the ground." He then called everyone in the restaurant, quote, "dirty swine Vietnam assholes," and claimed that he had, quote, "killed 1,000 and intended to, quote, kill 1,000 more. After James's racist rant, 25-year-old Victor Rivera tried persuading James not to shoot anyone else. James responded by shooting Victor 14 times and repeatedly shouting, "Shut up," as Rivera wailed in pain. Customers ducked under tables and crowded together, seeking protection from the crazed gunman. That's when James turned his attention towards 6 women and children huddled together. Hi, I'm Cam, and this is the McDonald's Massacre Part 2. That's when James turned his attention to 6 women and children huddled together. He shot 19-year-old Maria in the chest. He then fatally shot 9-year-old Claudia in the stomach, cheek, thigh, hip, leg, chest, back, armpit, and head with his Uzi. He wounded Claudia's 15-year-old sister and shot 11-year-old Aurora with his shotgun. That's when her pregnant aunt, 18-year-old Jackie Reyes, shielded her niece. James shot Jackie 48 times. Jackie's son, 8-month-old Carlos, sat up and cried beside his dead mother's body. James shouted at the baby and then killed him with a single shot to the center of his back. James then killed a truck driver, 62-year-old Lawrence, right before he targeted another family near the play area. The mother, Blythe, was shielding their 11-year-old son, Mateo. In the booth across from them was her husband, Ronald, shielding their son's 12-year-old friend, Keith. Ronald and Keith were shot numerous times but survived. Ronald's wife and son were less fortunate, dying of several shots to the head. 3 11-year-old boys, oblivious to the shooting, rode their bikes into the west side of the parking lot, ready to order ice cream sundaes. Someone yelled at them across from the street, so they hesitated. But it was too late. James saw them and shot the 3 boys with his Uzi and shotgun. Hi, I'm Cam, and this is the McDonald's Massacre Part 3. 3 11-year-old boys rode their bikes into the west side of the parking lot, ready to order ice cream sundaes. Someone yelled at them from across the street, so they hesitated. But it was too late. James saw them and shot the 3 boys with his Uzi and shotgun. Joshua fell to the ground, critically wounded, but he survived. Omar received gunshots to the back and began vomiting on the ground. David was shot several times in the head. Omar and David both died at the scene. An elderly couple, 74-year-old Miguel and 69-year-old Ada, tried walking out the doors. As Miguel reached to open the door for his wife, James shot Ada with a shotgun to the face and wounded Miguel. Miguel cradled his wife in his arms and wiped the blood from her face. He shouted curses at James. James approached Miguel, swore at him, and then killed him with a single shot to the head. After police arrived, James went up to the service counter and adjusted the portable radio to the music station. He then started dancing to the music as he shot more innocent victims. 5:17 p.m., Chuck Foster, a SWAT sniper, fired a single round 35 yards away. He hit James and severed his aorta just beneath his heart. He died immediately. The entire event lasted 77 minutes, and James fired a total of 257 rounds. He killed 21 people.
He is at 300 West. The shooting suspect is inside the McDonald's. He is contained, moving around in there. Still shots being fired.
He entered the facility heavily armed, immediately started shooting everybody. And the customers that were inside the restaurant had absolutely no chance to escape.
Oh, God.
These images are more of war than of a small fast food restaurant in San Ysidro. Yet it was a local man dressed in battle fatigues who declared, "I have killed 1,000, I'm gonna kill 1,000 more." 41-year-old James Huberty reportedly walked into the restaurant carrying a semi-automatic rifle and 2 other weapons, enough ammunition to last 2 hours. Witnesses inside said he fired wildly into the unsuspecting crowd gathered. It looked like a mass execution. Police, hearing the calls coming across the radio, were confused confused, not sure how to approach such a dangerous situation. It was all happening so fast. The SWAT team was called in to try and surround the building. Meanwhile, people who escaped, their bodies soaked with blood, were being taken care of by frantic emergency medical crews. The death toll started at 6, then 10, 20, and climbing. By 4:15, a virtual army of police and rescue personnel had crowded the main street through this border town. Suddenly, a shot was fired. Police radio screamed, "He's down, he's down, the suspect's down." James Huberty had fallen to a SWAT sharpshooter's bullet. One single bullet killed the man who had apparently systematically fired, loaded, and reloaded his weapon to kill all those people. It all happened in about an hour. No one can explain why anyone would take so many innocent lives. James Huberty didn't kill his 1,000. He killed enough to shake a whole country.
Let's talk about a girl who had to watch her parents die and then spend 88 days captive. Her name is Jamie Kloss, and this is her story. 13-year-old Jamie was asleep in her bed when she woke up from her dog barking. When she went to go look out her window to see what was going on, she noticed a strange car parked in her driveway. In fact, it was a car that she had seen before following her. Immediately, she runs to her parents' room to explain what's going on. Her father goes to the front door to check things out. Before he could even reach the door, he's shot in the face through the window. He was pronounced dead on the scene. By this time, Jamie and her mother are in the bathroom with the door closed, hiding inside of the bathtub. The intruder shoots down the door and makes his way through the house. He said that he skipped past every single door that was open and headed straight for the door that was closed because he knew that's where Jamie would be. The intruder was 21-year-old Jake Patterson. He breaks through the bathroom door and he notices that Jamie's mother is on the phone with the police. Let's roll the clip. There was 2 loud shots and then the call ended. Jake had broken through the door and shot her mother in the face twice. He then tied Jamie up and dragged her to his car. From the trunk of Jake's car, she heard the sirens, but it had already been too late. He was on the way to his cabin, where he would keep her for 88 days. At this cabin, she was forced to sleep underneath his bed. He put heavy weights around the whole bed so that way he would know if she ever attempted to escape. Whenever he would leave the room, he would always play loud music so that way she couldn't tell if he had company over. And he did, in fact, have multiple people in his house the same time that Jamie was underneath his bed. His friends said that he seemed more happier. They said it seemed that he was enjoying life a little bit more. There was actually a worldwide search for Jamie the next morning. Her face was all over the news. And the crazy thing is, they actually seen his car on the way to Jamie's house. They even noted it because the license plate was not registered to his vehicle. If they would have pulled him over, they would have found Jamie in his trunk. While she was in this cabin, they often played a lot of board games and would watch a lot of movies together. He even forced her to sleep in his bed. Thankfully, there is no reports that he ever sexually abused her or did anything sexual towards her. And also, there's no reports of him actually hurting her. Jake had told Jamie that he was going for an interview, and as soon as he left the house, Jamie immediately fought her way from underneath the bed, and she found a pair of shoes and rushed out of his home. She then ran into a neighbor who was walking her dog, and from there she received all the help that she needed. It only took authorities a few minutes to find Jake, and when they pulled him over, he immediately said, "Hey, I did it. While in court, he said he had did it because he had seen Jamie getting on the school bus, and ever since then he was obsessed with her. He tried to kidnap her 2 times before, but he failed. He was charged for everything and is now serving a life sentence.
One of the most insane serial killers I have ever learned about, I still to this day believe didn't work alone. So you guys know Jack the Ripper, right? Well, this guy not only outlasted and outdid him, but he put New York in one of the biggest states of fear and taunted investigators for years. Before we get into who he is and why I don't think he acted alone, let's talk about what he did. The first kill he ever made was stabbing 2 young girls on Christmas Eve of 1975. At this time, New York was an absolute shambles. People were being killed and assaulted all the time. Robberies were happening, bodies were being found, and the police really couldn't keep up with everything, so whenever this happened, it wasn't like a big news headliner. Well, a few months later, 2 girls were shot sitting in their car. Both of them ended up surviving, but it happened so fast that they didn't have any information on the suspect. Just some .44 caliber bullets left on scene. Well, the next attack occurred whenever this couple was sitting in a car. They reported that the whole car felt like it exploded, and the girl looked over and saw a bullet wound in the guy's head. Because of the bullets used, the police were able to make the connection. Part 2 to the son of Sam. So the police police noticed that the same shell casing was used, and so far all victims were female with medium-length brown hair. Well, it did not take long for another attack to occur. A man approached two women asking for directions. When he asked, he took out a gun and shot both of them, leaving one paralyzed with a spinal injury. And then after this came another couple sitting in a car. The police, having no leads, were like, okay, we're gonna need to announce this to the public that we have a serial killer on our hands. They released the few sketches that they did have, hoping for a lead. He was announced in the paper as the .44 caliber killer. The police also let the public know that he was looking for women with medium-length brown hair. So many women during this time cut their hair, dyed it blonde, whatever, so that they didn't match this profile. After this came out, he ends up killing another girl on her way home from school, and another couple who was sitting in their car on a date. But this killing was very different. This time, he actually left a letter for the police. I'm going to insert the letter. He introduces himself as the son of Sam, and his wording is just a little off. So the news decides to write him back. Part 3 to the son of Sam. So let me just talk a little bit more about this letter before we get into it. He obviously refers to his father as Sam and himself as the son of Sam. He paints his father as this very abusive figure that's essentially making him kill. He refers to himself as Beelzebub and as a brat. And we'll get to this later. So a very famous news article writer at the time named Jimmy Breslin writes to him begging him to stop. And not only does the son of Sam respond to him, but Jimmy publishes his response. This changed journalism. I'll put the response right here, but he uses words like from the gutter, Sam's creation. Meanwhile, the public is preparing for the anniversary of his first killing. Pepper spray has been sold out. Everyone is terrified, and it just so happens on the anniversary, a blackout occurs. Looting, burning down neighborhoods, and all of the cops were working that night, but they got through the whole night without anything occurring. But not long after, another murder takes place. Robert and Stacy are attacked on their first date. Stacy is the only blonde that he ever attacked, but leaving her dead and Robert blind. After this, the police were able to collect 5 sketches, but all of them were different. Part 4 to the son of Sam. Well, a woman ends up calling the police reporting suspicious activity. She was going for a walk when she saw a man hopping into his car. Instead of continuing into his car, he hops out and starts to approach her. She sees him start to take an object out of a bag, and she runs the opposite way, and then hears gunshots. Learning about all the nearby crimes, she makes the report. She also noticed that he had a parking ticket on his car. So the police find the parking tickets from that day from that area, figures out the license, and realizes the vehicle belongs to a guy named David Berkowitz. So the police call dispatchers inquiring about the ticket, and a dispatcher named Wheat Carr answers the phone, saying that she was his neighbor, and says, "Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Berkowitz. He's a very strange man who shot my dog that belonged to my father, Sam." So the police were like, Sam. Well, they get to his house and break into his car without a search warrant, and they find a lot of evidence, including a rifle, a map of the crime scenes, and a letter. So they wait for him to leave his apartment, and when he does, they ask him if he's David Berkowitz. And he responds with, "No, I am the son of Sam, and you got me." Part 5 to the son of Sam. So once they found and arrested David Berkowitz, they brought him in for questioning. And it only took investigators 30 minutes to get him to admit to everything. And his reasoning behind the killings was because of a 6,000-year-old demon dog who was speaking to him through the dog of his neighbor. He was the one calling the shots and demanding him to kill. And one particular investigator that was very obsessed with this case, named Maury Terry, was wondering why he didn't match any of the sketches. It's normal for eyewitnesses to be wrong to some degree, but you wouldn't describe Berkowitz as being 6 foot and blonde. There was also some worry if the evidence would even hold up in court, because they got it without a search warrant. But in court, David admitted to everything, so they didn't even need evidence. He was sentenced 25 years to life for each murder. So case closed, right? Well, if we look back to the letter, there's the name John Wheaties. Wheat Carr and John Carr are Sam Carr's children, Berkowitz's neighbors. And from looking at the eyewitness sketches, the sketches look more like John Carr, Sam's actual son. One of the most terrifying cults that I have learned about recently refers to themselves as the Children. And the reason that they terrify me so much is because they are related to so many other cults. Well, Scientology came about in 1953. And 2 members from this church, Robert D. Grimson and Marianne McLean, decided to leave it and start the cult of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And they brought their satanic teachings to the US around the 1970s. Well, if you guys watched my previous video about the Son of Sam killings, which occurred in New York City around the 1970s, you might be able to connect these 2 things together. Well, the issue with this case is that one man was convicted. But it seems as though police really fudged this up. There was so much attention around this case that they were just looking to just put someone behind bars instead of actually doing full investigations. Well, one editor named Maury Terry ended up taking investigating into his own hands. And not only was he able to find a substantial amount of evidence and cryptic messages, but he was also able to find where the cult would meet up for their rituals, Devil's Cave. Part 2 to why I don't think the Son of Sam worked alone. Well, it was rumored that there was a cult working in New York City that was an offshoot of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. They referred to themselves as the children and ended up in Yonkers. Well, when Maury was doing his investigating, he was let know by several people that their rituals were done in Untermeyer Park, an estate that used to be absolutely beautiful. But as you can see from the pictures, there's now an abandoned pump house. And when investigating this, trigger warning, they found blood on the walls and blood on the ceiling, and symbolic writing. Not only this, but dead animals were everywhere, including specifically dogs. So then it was time to look back at David's letters, in which he made cultural references to Beelzebub, which is the demon known as Lord of the Flies, and Brat, which is a small devil. He also ended his letter as From the Gutters, which was quite literally the nickname for the abandoned pump house. And when holding how he signed his name at the end of the letters to the mirror, you can find the words Sam and Carr and Burke in it. So where were the actual sons of Sam, and why hadn't they been questioned? Part 3 to why I don't think the son of Sam worked alone. Well, after Maury had taken an investigation into his own hand and was seeing all these connections, he went to the police with it. And he was essentially just told to shut it down. That they had their man behind bars, there's no way other people worked with him, even though there was clear indications that he was working with a cult, and none of the eyewitness sketches even looked like him. So the last thing to do would be able to tie the sons of Sam to the actual case. So John, Michael, and Wheat Carr were all the kids of Sam, Michael and John specifically being the sons. After talking to neighbors, there were several stories about Sam beating them. Their father Sam struggled with alcoholism, and this was all included in the letter that David wrote. So Maury's like, okay, let's go do investigating in the place that they were from, Minot, North Dakota. And when they got to their hometown, they were told by everyone that they were legitimately cult leaders. There was accounts of them sacrificing dogs, drinking blood, all of the work. So Maury was like, okay, we need to actually get a hold of these guys. Maybe they'll be open to talking about it. But soon after that, it was reported that they both mysteriously died. Part 4 to why I don't think the son of Sam worked alone. So how did the other suspects mysteriously die, you might be asking? Well, one randomly unalived himself, while the other died in a mysterious car crash, which is entirely suspicious. So after adding all of this evidence together, they were able to release it to the public. And it made sense that Berkowitz would have had other people watching, other people holding the gun, other people doing the killings, all orchestrated by a cult leader. But because their main suspects for this case were now dead, there wasn't really much that they could do. Maury was trying to prevent this from happening again, though. Like, what if the children decide to send another member of theirs out? Either way, their parent cult, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, was neighbors to Charles Manson, and is where he got many of his own foundational ideas for his cult. So it's so clear that these connections run deep. Let me know what you guys think of this case. Let me know if there's anything in this that you want me to talk about next, like Scientology or Charles Manson, or if you want to hear more about the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Either way, follow my Instagram for more content.
TikTok keeps taking us down, so let's talk about the girl who had her insides ripped out of her in a more lighter way. She was walking home from school one day and she met this guy who was 57 years old. She was 8 at the time. He led her in the bathroom, and it was there that he raped her, from her private areas to her mouth and ears. He then took a toilet plunger and shoved it up her private areas to remove his DNA. The force was so brutal and so crazy that it actually pulled out her organs. Oh, and I forgot to mention, because I recorded this video like 7 times already, that when she didn't want to do the activities he wanted her to do, he began to punch her about 7 times in her face, and then when she cried, he bit her in her cheek, and a chunk of her cheek ended up falling off. Anyways, back to the story. He then tried to drown her, and I guess he felt like he did, so he went about his day as if nothing happened. Also, this is her cheek. Anyways, she ended up regaining consciousness because he did choke her out, and that's how he was able to do what he did to her without her screaming or anything. When she woke up, she crawled out of the bathroom with her organs hanging out of her and received help from a nearby neighbor. When she got to the hospital, she stayed in surgery for 8 hours, and her injuries were classified as 3rd degree. Both mentally and physically, she was messed up, and now she needs someone to take care of her for the rest of her life. Anyways, they ended up finding him, and they was questioning him about it, and he denied everything until they said, well, hey, we have your evidence all over the crime scene. And then he said it was because he was drunk. Then they needed Naomi's statement, so they made her go to the police station about 8 times while she was still recovering from her injuries, bleeding and all. They forced her to go to the police station to give her statement. Not 1 time, not 2 times, but 4. Why? Because they kept losing her statement, forgetting to ask her certain questions, and forgetting to record the session. So now let's get into the trial. During the trial, they asked Naomi if she had smelled any alcohol coming from him, and she said yes. Because of this, he was only charged 12 years because there's a law in Korea that states if you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, you cannot be charged the maximum. So he was released last December, and it's rumored to believe that he now lives in the same neighborhood as her. Her family did sue the police station for putting her through so much trauma. I'm not sure how much money they won, but I hope with the money they use it to move away, because that is absolutely disgusting. The story gets so much worse than this. Maybe I'll post it on my Instagram or my Snapchat, link in my bio, so you can watch the whole video. But if not, they also have a movie called Hope, and it tells her story from beginning to end. I had to record this video 7 times, so yes, I summed it up a lot, but there's a lot that should be said. Hopefully TikTok doesn't take this down again. But anyways, I have a Q&A in my bio where you can leave video suggestions, and there I am always looking for the next thing to talk about. Peace and happiness.
I had never heard of this case before, but one of my followers requested it, and my heart hurts. Today we're going to be talking about Mary Ann Measles. This case takes place October 1997 in New Milford, Connecticut. So 13-year-old Mary approached her mother Cindy and told her that she had had 2 older men. By older I mean like 18 and 21, and of course her mother was furious and told her, like, that's not consensual, that's and we're going to the police. So Cindy took her to the police and filed a statutory claim, but because Mary Ann wouldn't really cooperate, nothing happened. Nothing came out of it. 2 days later, Mary Ann was downtown, and she was confronted by those 2 guys and their girlfriends, and they started yelling at her and getting in her face, threatening her. They were upset that her mother had gone to the police. So she called her mother, and her mother heard what was going on and immediately came and picked her up. So Cindy picked her up, and they went to a grocery store, and Mary Ann waited for her in the car while she went in. But when she came back out, Mary Ann was nowhere to be found. Cindy called the police, but they said because Mary Ann was sort of known to be a runaway, she needed to wait. 2 whole days went by of just the family looking before the police finally joined their efforts, but they didn't find anything. Nothing was found until July 15th of 1998, which is almost a full year after she went missing, when a body was recovered from a lake in the nearby town of Bridgewater, Connecticut, and it was identified through dental records as being Mary Ann. Nothing was really known until October of 2002, which is 5 years after she went missing, when 8 people were arrested. Her family found out in the courtroom what happened to her, which, trigger warning. So basically, when her mom came to pick her up after that confrontation and they went to the grocery store, she was unaware that they were actually followed. So when her mom went in, she was taken from and driven to a secluded location, which was known as the Pump House. And the idea allegedly was to scare her. And it was by the older men and by their girlfriends they wanted revenge on her for sleeping with their boyfriends. This escalated to them punching her and kicking her. She got so scared at one point, she urinated on herself. They left some of her clothes in the pump house in a abandoned washer that was in there. She was driven to another location that was by a riverbank. Once there, she was forced out of the vehicle and her head was held underwater until she passed away. Trigger warning. She was also sexually assaulted post-mortem before her body was wrapped in blankets and chains and thrown into the river. The state found the 5 men and the 3 women guilty of conspiracy to kidnap, rape, and murder 7th grade Mary Ann.
Let's talk about a girl who spent 44 days in hell. Her name is Jonku Furuta, and she was 16 years old at the time. She was very popular at school because of her beauty, but not only that, she was extremely book smart. She was a straight-A student. One day while at school, a boy who was affiliated with the very dangerous gang asked her out, and she rejected him. He took the rejection to heart, and he set up a plan to kidnap her with his friends. The kidnapping was successful, and they took Jonku back to one of the houses that the boy's parents owned. 2 days after her missing, her family put in a missing persons report. Everybody in Japan was looking for her. So the boys made her call her parents and tell them that she was safe and that she was just with a friend. The parents that owned the house knew that Jonku was there, but they were paid hush money to stay silent, as well as they were scared to say anything to the police because they knew what the boys were capable of. Things are about to get graphic, so this is your chance to scroll away. They kept her naked for most of the time to humiliate her. They took turns raping her. She was raped by more than 100 men, more than 500 times. And one time there was a day where she was raped 12 times back to back. Most of the time after they were finished doing that to her, they would often pee on her. They would smash her face into cement and beat her with golf clubs. They would make her touch herself in front of the men to turn them on before they would rape her. They would stick all sorts of crazy objects inside of her, from scissors, needles, iron rods, and one time there was a hot light bulb that they forced inside of her and twisted it around until it popped inside of her. Sometimes they would grab fireworks and shove them up her butt and light them. Other times they would have a big weight and drop them on her stomach while her hands are tied above her head. They would tie her from the ceiling and punch her like she was a punching bag. During this time it was winter and below freezing, so they would make her sleep outside on the balcony. They would burn her eyelids with hot wax, and they even crushed her hands so much that she couldn't hold anything. It would take her about an hour to crawl downstairs just to use the restroom. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished because of the fact that she couldn't eat, and whenever she did, she would throw it up because her organs were so damaged. Her suffering came to an end when she won a game against the boys, and they put lighter fluid all over her face, arms, torso, and legs, and they lit her on fire. She fell into shock, and they thought that she was just pretending to die, but she was actually dead. So they filled this huge drum with cement and shoved her body down there. Then they disposed of her somewhere in Tokyo. While being questioned about a different case, one of the boys thought that they were talking about Jungkook, and he quickly admitted to everything and told the police where her body was and all the horrible things that they did to her. The time they got was very short. I believe the highest one of the boys received was 20, and the rest of the boys were sentenced below that. So they're now all in their mid-30s.
This case has been requested a lot, so I'm doing it, but I want to give a warning. It's gonna be pretty long. It is extremely graphic and upsetting. I'm gonna get super emotional, and I'm probably gonna end up turning the comments off. So today we are talking about the case of 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez. I'm gonna start at the beginning. Over the course of Gabriel's life, his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isaro, had over 8 investigations into them by the Los Angeles County Child Protective Services and the Department of Children and Family Services. All of them unfounded, which is pretty hard to believe considering the things that Gabriel went through. Gabriel was born in 2005, and almost right after he was born, his mom, Pearl, said she didn't want him, so custody was given to his maternal grandmother. His mom actually didn't have custody until 2012. So in 2012, Gabriel's mom just showed back up out of the blue and said the family that he was with was neglecting him. They all, of course, objected and said she just wanted Gabriel's welfare benefits, but she got custody back. Gabriel's biological father was in and out of jail, but he was under the impression that Gabriel was with his grandparents, not with Pearl. Now, once Gabriel was with Pearl, things started to go bad super quickly. He barely ever went to school, but when he did, he was tardy a lot, and he was known to be kind of aggressive to other students. He had a hard time making friends. He also exhibited some odd behavior. There's reports that during a Red Ribbon Week, he mimicked snorting cocaine. He was in grade school. Around the same time, Gabriel also asked his teacher, Jennifer Garcia, if it was normal for moms to hit their kids with belts so hard that they bled. He also routinely cried at the end of the day because he didn't want to go home. Jennifer started calling social services with reports of numerous injuries to Gabriel. In November of 2012, Gabriel showed up to school one day with this horrific haircut. When Jennifer looked closer, she noticed that his actual scalp was cut in certain areas and starting to scab over. She, again, called social services. Gabriel came to school a few days later with a busted lip, which you can see in the previous photo. He said his mom punched him in the face. She called social services again. In January of 2013, Gabriel came to school with a swollen, bruised face. His eyes were super swollen, and his face had these tiny little dot bruises all over it. At first, he told his teacher that he fell, but he eventually confessed that his mother had shot him in the face with a BB gun. Later that month, a social worker visited the Fernandez home, and when he asked Gabriel about his injuries, he said that he fell down. The family was enrolled in a program called the Voluntary Family Maintenance Program, which is for low-risk families. In February of 2013, a therapist talked to Pearl about suicide notes that Gabriel wrote. Gabriel told the therapist that he was serious. One of the notes was addressed to his mom, and it said, "I love you so much that I will die." The therapist told social workers and called 911. The social workers did nothing, surprise. And 911 sent an officer to the house who left the house without even talking to Gabriel. That same therapist also filed a report because Gabriel told her that he was forced to perform oral sex on a family member. Social workers thought the best course of action would be to ask Gabriel about this in front of his mother, so he took back everything that he said. After this, the risk level on Gabriel's case was manually changed from very high to moderate, and his case was closed. Right before Mother's Day, I'm about to cry, Gabriel showed up to school looking the worst he ever had. His teacher left it up to him whether or not he wanted to participate in making Mother's Day cards. He did. He did want to, and he tried super hard. This is the card he made. It's a house, and it says, "Open the door to see who loves you," and it has a picture of Gabriel in it. His teacher called social services again. Now, his school finally had kind of fucking had enough, so they decided to get law enforcement involved, and a sheriff tried to go to the house, but they had the wrong address on file, so when they called his mom, she said Gabriel didn't live there anymore. She said he'd moved to Texas to live with his grandma. And then just days later, on May 22nd of 2013, she called 911 to say that Gabriel hit his head on a dresser and wasn't breathing. Paramedics arrived and found Gabriel unconscious. He was quickly transported to the hospital where he was placed on life support. Doctors evaluated him and they found he had a fractured skull, broken ribs, missing teeth, broken nose, BB pellets embedded all over his body, cigarette burns on his genitals and his neck and his feet. He had ligature marks on his ankles from where they'd been tied together, handcuff marks on his wrists. He had internal injuries. There was cat feces shoved down his throat. Gabriel was pronounced brain dead, kept on life support for 2 days, and he passed away on May 24th of 2013 at 8 years old. I'm going to show you the drawings of his injuries, just a trigger warning. This didn't fucking come from hitting a dresser. During the trial, some more horrific information came to light, mostly due to the testimony of his siblings. Things like Gabriel being forced to consume his own vomit, consume cat litter. He was locked in a small cabinet most of the time, including to sleep with his hands and ankles bound and a sock in his mouth. The mom's boyfriend made him wear girl clothes to school and told him that he hated him because he was gay. They pepper sprayed him. In June of 2018, his mother, if you can even fucking call her that, and her boyfriend were found guilty of murder and torture. She took a plea deal where she was offered a life sentence without a possibility of parole in exchange for her guilty plea, and he received the death penalty. The 4 social workers involved were all fired, but were found not criminally responsible or negligent.
Let's talk about the murder of Kellyanne Bates. Kelly was only 14 years old when she met a man by the name of Dave Smith. He was 34 years old at the time, and because of their age difference, they kept the first 2 years of their relationship private. After 2 years of dating, Dave was finally able to meet Kelly's parents. This whole time, Kelly's parents was expecting Dave to be a boy from school, not a grown man, so when they met him, they were completely shocked. Kelly's mother said that when she met Dave, all the hairs on the back of her neck stood up and she had the urge to just remove him out of her daughter's life. The relationship continued and eventually Kelly moved in with Dave. That's when things got really crazy. He became really aggressive and controlling, and eventually it got to the point where Kelly couldn't even communicate outside of him, which basically means that she wasn't able to contact her family or friends without his permission. And then it got to the point where Kelly couldn't communicate with her family at all. The only way her family would know that she was okay was when Dave would write letters pretending to be Kelly to the family for holidays. So assuming this was Kelly, they just took it for what it was and they didn't want to strain the relationship more than it already was. For the majority of her time living there, Kelly was tied up by her hair. She was starved and severely dehydrated. Dave would beat her multiple times a day. One point, Dave actually took a hot iron that you iron your clothes with and he pressed it onto Kelly's thigh, burning her thighs severely. He would strangle her almost daily, and then he would stab her all over her body, her chest, her arms, her legs, everywhere. He took a tool similar to this and he began to dismember her body, her face, her ears, her lips, her nose, her eyes, her scalp. He cut it off. Then 5 days before she actually died, he gouged her eyes out, and while she was still alive and her eyeballs were removed from the socket, he actually took a knife and was stabbing her in her empty eye sockets. Now, just getting water in your empty eye sockets is hell. It's absolute torture. So imagine someone stabbing that. Then one night they were having an argument, Dave claims, and he began to beat her with the shower head, and she fell unconscious, so he just took it upon himself to drown her. The next day, Dave walks into the police station and explains that he accidentally killed his girlfriend. So the police rush to the scene to see what's going on, and they can tell off tops that it was no accident. The scarring on her body was so brutal that one of the officers said that in his 60 years of working for the force, he had never seen something so nasty. Her autopsy revealed that she had more than 150 different wounds. Kelly's mother was so hurt by the situation that she couldn't even go view her daughter's body. She made her father go do it. In court, when asked why he did this, he said because Kelly wanted him to do this, that she liked pain, and that he would also lash out in anger when she talked about his dead mother, which is completely untrue. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years.